Hey everyone, we're back again with the second part of Mr. Leman Russ, and this time we're going to paint the grey armour. Sometimes I do a tutorial video and I film it and I don't like it, so I have to repaint it, which makes it difficult to do step by step, sort of in the right order, because if I paint over something, obviously the result is slightly differently. So basically what happened is I kind of painted a grey. I focused mostly on the leg and it was just wrong, and I'll talk about why I didn't like it at some point. Then I repainted the leg, felt I got it right, and then I sort of started from scratch with my new proposed recipe or process on another part, and it turned out, yeah, really great. So what I'm going to do is just talk about why I chose my initial grey and then why I changed it. And yeah, in the end, I think you'll have a good idea of a process to follow. And just I think it's really cool to show mistakes and why I change it. And I hope that you find that useful. Had good feedback on that before. So yeah, this is one of those videos. As I do very often, I started with a reference for the grey, and my favourite one was this colour plate from the 4-Draw books. We love these for Heresy, myself and Henry, and I'm sure you do too. And yeah, I just really like the grey in this one, so I put it into Photoshop and I used the colour dropper to extract the colours and just kind of work out what paints I wanted to use. You can see it's a pretty straight down the middle kind of grey palette. There's nothing too special here, especially in the shadows and the highlights. But what is interesting to me is the midtones did look reddish, so they weren't like a blue-grey. They had some red tone in, and that was something I knew I wanted to do anyway. So the closest colour I could find, or a colour I thought would work, was dark sea grey from AK. I love AK paints, by the way. If you see sort of my recent videos, you see I use them a lot. I think if I could choose one range right now, it would be AK, so I do recommend getting a load of these paints. Another option was the reddish grey, but I used that in some other tutorials recently you'll have seen, so I tried to pick something a little different, and I think dark sea grey is just slightly, well, less red, but it's the right amount of red in it, if you see what I mean, not too over the top. I also said in my Sons of Horus Contemptor video that what makes these Heresy plates look cool is all the texture in them. So the grey is actually, you know, the equivalent of stippled if we were going to do it with painting. So it's not smooth actually and shiny. So I wanted to do that in the painting and do a sort of marked texture, lots of brush strokes, and also lots of battle damage. I don't want a shiny, pristine Russ. It just doesn't suit him. So we want to paint it with some highlights, some rendering, but not too shiny, and then we want to have some nice battle damage. So that was the look I was going for. I'm not going to say it's grim dark, but it's battle damaged and it's not too over the top. So yeah, subtle for me. Let's go with that. So I'm using a clip here from the first video, and this is where I airbrushed it with German grey all over, and I think I would switch to dark grey or eclipse grey from scale because these are a little lighter. German grey is just a bit too dark for the base coat, but it's absolutely fine to start from black or a very dark grey. But I think, yeah, if I could have my time again, then dark grey from AK all over. So my original recipe was German grey, dark sea grey, which we like, and medium grey. And to be fair, I think these do best match the color palette, but it was just a little boring and straight down the middle. I also painted it too bright with too much medium grey. That was the main issue I had, as you'll see. But actually, I think what I changed to eventually was having some blue grey in the mix. And the reason that's really nice is we have a temperature contrast as we go through the colours. So dark sea grey is obviously very warm because it has some red or brown in it, and then the blue grey obviously is a cold colour with that touch of blue. So we don't have to rely as much on value contrast, which is sort of the light and dark shading, so we can be a bit more subtle with that, but it still looks great because as we change from the brown tones into the highlights and they become blue, then yeah, there's something that not everyone will notice, but it just has more contrast, but it's with color as opposed to those values. So this is what I switched to eventually, but let me take you through what I did first of all with the dark sea grey and medium grey. I first started painting dark sea grey pretty much all over the model, as you can see, so I covered quite a wide area, and actually I think this should form the highlight. So what I would do is probably mix dark grey with the dark sea grey, and that would be a nice first tone, and then start using the dark sea grey as the kind of mid-tone, almost highlights, before I start adding the blue. What I did was paint all this dark sea grey pretty much all over the whole figure. Then I started to add the medium grey. Another issue I encountered, and actually this is a problem I have all the time, is judging the contrast. So I just kept adding medium grey to the dark sea grey, and I got brighter and brighter, and I felt like it didn't have enough contrast and it wasn't interesting enough, and I looked at the reference and the highlights were quite bright, so I pushed all the way to medium grey, and that was fine, it looked okay, but it was way too pale and light. It just didn't really suit Russ, I don't think. It wasn't the look I was going for. And the grey was just straight down the middle, too much. So what I don't like about it is it's just uninteresting. So this is why I thought I haven't got enough of that wonderful tone in there, the dark sea grey. I've just kind of covered it with the medium grey, which is a fantastic paint, great grey, but it's just a little bit dull, I think. So I had to repaint over the top of this, and I just went over it again with the dark sea grey, and it was nice to kind of have this back. I did have to darken up the shadows too, and this is where I switched to dark grey instead of the German grey I started with, and I thought, okay, this is better. So all this time I'm kind of painting and I'm repainting and I'm trying to work out the nicer colours. I think when you're doing a new project, this is going to happen. So it's nice to practice on a Space Marine leg, like a spare one. I mean, I'm practicing on the job here because obviously I'm doing it on Russ, but luckily the paint's thin enough, so, you know, the overall effect was fine. But I kind of tested the recipe on this leg, and yeah, it didn't work. So after basically getting a transition from dark grey up to dark sea grey, I used a new colour which is scale 75 graphite, and this is very similar to dark sea grey. It's not much brighter, but it's a lovely paint, a really nice, not super warm, it's actually quite neutral grey, but it's just lovely for this armour and very matte. So that was kind of a new colour introduced, a nice blend between the blue grey and the dark sea grey, and this is where it starts to look good because I kind of erased all those mistakes. And after I'd highlighted with the graphite, then I started to add in the blue grey, and this is where the tones start to get interesting, and I was like, okay, now I like this colour, this is looking better. So armed with the tone that I like, which was graphite with a touch of blue grey, start to add these highlights, and my focus is actually on the right hand side, so it's all on that one side of the leg, the chest and the top of the forearm, and then a little bit of that shoulder pad. So I'm putting all the focus on the right hand side. What we can do on the shadow side is the final highlight will be the dark sea grey, and it's only this one side in the light that will start to add the blue, and that will just make it a little more dramatic and interesting. So I just want to draw all the attention to kind of one side of the figure, and using that blue is really going to help separate that. When I got to this point, I built the highlights up with small scratches and lines. So you kind of do a normal shape highlight, but actually I blend it with little marks and things like that. Then you have to edge highlight some of these parts on the leg, all these different kind of armor panels, I guess. But don't hit up every edge. Try to just cover the ones that are facing the light, basically. If you highlight all of these edges really bright, it's really distracting and doesn't draw the eye where you want. It sort of makes your light source not work anymore because it's like the highlights coming from all directions. So just try and emphasize the edge that faces towards your light. When I was happy with this leg, and yeah, actually, that's a good point. When I got to this point, yeah, I was happy with this recipe now. I had the volumes better. It still was quite bright, but not as bright, with better colors. The volumes were better. So yeah, it was a bit closer to my vision. There's not loads in it, but that little bit of extra color, slightly reined back, it just makes all the difference. It wasn't right before. So yeah, a bit of experimentation. I got there in the end. I was like happy with the colors, and it's important I'm happy with the colors because I want to tell you guys what I'm using and give you a great process to follow. I finished by trying out the battle damage, and I put quite a lot on the legs because obviously they're lower down and especially at the front here. And I used burnt umber because it's a really dark, quite neutral brown. Rhinox hide's fine, but it's a lot redder and it's a bit more satin. So I like the really matte kind of burnt umber here for damage. And like I said, I'm just focusing almost, instead of having edge highlights, just doing little dots and chipping away. And I think these little tiny battle damage marks, together with the marks we've done the highlights, make the armor more alive and interesting because there's texture and noise and information. And yeah, this is just a feeling you get from the color plates from Forge World. So this is what I really wanted in this model. I'm not going for super smooth or clean, but yeah, just feel and kind of texture. So I've gone over that process quite quickly, and that's because this was kind of still me practicing, I guess. So obviously I filmed it to show you, but here I'm working on the shoulder pad, and that I've just highlighted from dark grey up to dark sea grey, and I thought I'll use this to go a bit slower and show you a sort of full highlighting process. So here I'm actually using the Scale 75 graphite, and you can see I'm doing quite big brush strokes, but also little scratches at the end to kind of transition in between here. I'm going to put all of the light at the top of this pad, but at this stage with the graphite, I'm kind of painting all of one side. So I'm just letting it dry, and I might need a second application. And when it comes to the other side, I add another highlight, but this one's going to be a little smaller, and I'll focus on a tighter area here. But yeah, just build up with nice diluted paint, but do lots of little marks and brush strokes along the way. You can see I'm on the point here of the tip rather than using a lot of the brush, and that's a difference. It's time consuming, but like I said, I like all the information and the noise we get from this look. So now we come to adding in the blue-grey to the graphite, and it was really nice to do this shoulder pad from kind of the start all the way through, because obviously when I did that leg, I painted over it. So this was kind of like the recipe I'd like you guys to follow, and it was the part where I went just from that dark grey, I went through the process how I wish I did from the start, basically, and yeah, it worked out. It was really great. You can see this tone in between, the mix of graphite doesn't look too blue, so it's important for the transition. And I'm covering a smaller area here and being a bit more careful with the brush marks I do. So it's random with the lines and the dots, but I'm also trying to draw focus and a particular shape highlight. So you kind of need to make a highlight shape that fits the shoulder pad whilst having, those lines and that texture and stuff like that. Quite tricky, but I think really rewarding. So the highlight's looking pretty good now. I've built that up with another coat, and now I'm just adding some more of that blue-grey. So I had two mixes of graphite and blue-grey before I finished with some pure blue-grey, which I had to be careful with because just a little bit of graphite does take the edge of the blue away in a nice way. So you've got to be careful with that. And then you can see here on the chest armor, I add this bright color and just little edge highlights and working around the figure. I actually really like getting to this point because the highlight areas are small, so it's so quick, and the colors are bright, so it just has a massive impact. But yeah, the leg was tough for me because I repainted it, but when I did this shoulder and the chest, it was a real pleasure. And this arm as well, actually, you can see me adding the highlight here on the forearm, and I just start off with a line down the middle because I know I need that highlight shape, and then I sort of use little scratches and marks to blend that later. So I think here I am just glazing this now, and this was a super key step. So once I've highlighted up the blue-grey, I take some of that dark sea grey and I really dilute it down. And this did a few things actually, because when you have those marks and scratches from building it up, this little glaze actually softens those, so they're still there, but it makes them more subtle, which is absolutely wonderful. And it also adjusted the volume. I found this really helped get the right amount of blue-grey in the highlights, because it kind of, it just softened it a little bit, just like the scratches, and this is where I got the exact colour I wanted. So build it all up the way I said, but then definitely finish with some glazes of this dark sea grey. Now make sure you have both those tones in there, because sometimes you can kind of erase the nice tones as you layer up, and you still have that reddish grey going into that wonderful blue-grey. I think it's really cool there on the shoulder pad at the top, because you can see both those tones really clear. But yeah, this was the bit where I thought, yeah, I'm happy with that, it works. Build on up to that blue-grey, a little glaze of the dark sea grey, and yeah, this is what I had in my head, so I hope you like the colour as well. This glaze of dark sea grey was so fantastic that I actually went back to the leg and did some adjustments as well. If you overdo it on the glaze, then you can reapply your highlights of blue-grey again, and it's such a good way of going back and forth, because you can get a really good smooth blend there. And every time as well, you're adding different marks and texture and just building up a really deep, interesting paint job. I took some still photos because I thought it'd be great to just really zoom in and talk about the final look. So looking at the shoulder pad here, hopefully you like what I've done and you can see what I was aiming for. We have the dark grey at the bottom. Actually, it could probably do with a few brush marks because it's looking a little empty. But then most of the colour is dark sea grey. That's the mid-tone. And I think that highlight at the top is reasonably subtle. Like I said, it's not shiny, but you can really see the blue contrasting to the warm greys here. And I think that's the right balance for this figure of having impact, but yeah, not too over the top. You can see also I did those burnt umber chips like I did on the leg, and focusing on the edges and just doing the smallest little dots I can, I think really adds a lot. If you wanted to do this armour really smooth and polished, then it will look fantastic. But I think it suits Russ's character and the Horus Heresy more to have all this stuff going on. So lots of brush marks, lots of battle damage, but do this with control, do it with smooth paint, and I think, yeah, it looks really cool. Now looking at a close-up of the leg, you can see we've got the light focused on one side, and I think it looks better on the thigh armour because it's a bit cleaner, there's less stuff going on, so we can see that nice highlight on one side. And again, I think looking at it in a still photo is important because I can control the correct exposure here. I noticed looking at some of these video clips that it looked really bright and really contrasty, but I've sort of tried to do these photos which match the colours in real life a bit better, and then I think it looks more subtle and closer to what's in hand. But you can really see the three tones, which is the dark grey, which is just a neutral kind of grey, into that mid-tone with red, and that little subtle highlight with a bit more blue in, and also really see the amount of texture that's in this. And it's a hard balance to get the amount of texture right because you don't want it to look messy. I think the best way to describe it is if you hold it sort of 2 feet away, it will just look like a smooth highlighted rendered space marine like normal, but when we go in close it's really nice to have all this information and stuff happening. But make sure you paint smooth so we can have lots of texture, but we don't want physical texture of paint, so we're always using diluted paint so it looks nice sat on the model. You don't want it to be bumpy and lumpy. You want to just have all these chips and effects, really, not physical bumps. I feel like most of this video I've really been explaining my choices and my approach as opposed to a pure step-by-step. So let me know what you thought of this one. Maybe it's a different style to normal, certainly in my eyes, but you might think this is business as usual. So yeah, I'd like your perspective on that. But just to kind of start from scratch and reiterate, I think paint the whole model dark grey all over, then make a mix of dark grey with dark sea grey and start to build up the highlights with this. Then do a highlight of dark sea grey, and in the shadows this will be the final highlight. And then you can use some graphite, but you could just add the blue grey into the dark sea grey. But I would go dark sea grey, graphite highlights, start to add the blue grey to the graphite in a couple steps, and then finish with a glaze of dark sea grey. So I hope that's a clear enough explanation, and I really hope you like the colours and enjoy my thought process. So this is a rambly one, but I've really enjoyed it, and actually I really enjoyed talking about why I kind of do stuff, even though, yeah, it's just a grey Space Marine. It could be potentially quite boring, so yeah, I've tried to make it interesting. But I'm really enjoying doing this Russ, and I hope you're enjoying the series too, and I hope we can get through some of these details and come up with some other great recipes. So yeah, let me know what you think, and until next time, have fun painting some grey.